She told everyone I refused to be a father. I asked for a paternity test. She called me disgusting. So I replied with proof I'd been infertile for years. Her lawyer's next move shocked everyone. I did not find out my marriage was collapsing during an argument or a confession or a late-night fight that spiraled out of control. I found out at a Sunday gathering that was supposed to be harmless. It was meant to be one of those polite family afternoons where nothing real is said and nothing permanent happens. Instead, it became the moment my name was quietly rewritten in other people's minds. My name is Julian Mercer, and until that day, I believed my marriage to Natalie Mercer was strained but stable. We had disagreements, mostly about timing and priorities, but nothing that felt explosive. We had been married for years. We both worked. We both paid the mortgage. We both showed up to holidays and birthdays. From the outside, there was nothing dramatic to see. That afternoon, Natalie stood up near the dining table with a glass of water in her hand. She did not smile, but she did not look nervous either. She looked prepared. That was the first thing I noticed, although I did not understand why it mattered yet. She announced that she was pregnant. There was a brief pause, then applause, hugs, congratulations, and immediate excitement. People turned toward me automatically, expecting a reaction. I smiled because that was the expected response. I did not shout or celebrate, but I did not object either. I was still processing the words. Natalie continued speaking before anyone asked questions. She explained that she had not wanted to make a scene, but felt it was time to be honest. She said she was going to be a mother with or without support. She said she had been strong through months of uncertainty. She said some people were not ready for responsibility when it mattered most. She never said my name. She did not have to. The room understood. People began looking at me differently. Not angrily, not yet, but with a quiet judgment that settled into the air. The kind of judgment that does not shout. The kind that sticks. I did not interrupt her. I did not challenge her version of events in front of her parents, her sister, her cousins, and friends who had come along out of politeness. I told myself there would be time later. I told myself this was not the place. After the gathering ended, conversations did not resume as normal. People avoided eye contact. Some hugged me too tightly. Some did not hug me at all. One of her aunts told me that fatherhood scared a lot of men at first, but that real men stepped up eventually. I did not argue. On the drive home, Natalie said nothing. She stared out the window as if the announcement had drained her energy. I waited for her to explain why she had framed it the way she did. I waited for her to acknowledge what she had implied. She did not. Over the next week, the story spread faster than I expected. It did not explode, it seeped. It reached coworkers, neighbors, and people who had no business knowing anything about my marriage. Natalie did not send messages or post dramatic updates online. She did not need to. She told the story selectively, calmly, and consistently. According to her, she was pregnant and alone in spirit. According to her, I had withdrawn emotionally when she needed reassurance. According to her, she had asked for support and received hesitation instead. No one contacted me to ask if any of this was true. People stopped inviting me to casual gatherings. Conversations at work grew shorter. A colleague I had known for years asked if everything was okay at home and did not wait for an answer before adding that stress did strange things to people. At night, Natalie behaved as if nothing unusual had happened. She cooked dinner. She watched television. She went to bed at the same time. She never mentioned the announcement again. I tried to bring it up once, calmly. I asked her why she had said what she said. She replied that she had spoken honestly and that if I felt uncomfortable, that was something I needed to work through. That was the first time I noticed how confident she sounded. Not defensive, not emotional, confident. I began paying attention to details I had ignored before. Her certainty about timelines. Her refusal to discuss specifics. The way she never once asked how I felt about becoming a father, only whether I was ready to support her. I did not accuse her of anything. I did not shout. I did not demand explanations. I asked one simple question, carefully and privately. I asked for a paternity test. The reaction was immediate and disproportionate. Natalie did not respond with surprise. She responded with outrage. She told me I was disgusting. She told me that questioning her integrity was emotional violence. She told me that only a man who had already decided to abandon his child would ask such a thing. The next day, her sister called me. She did not ask what had happened. She told me I should be ashamed. Natalie's confidence turned into control. She framed my request as proof that I was unfit to be a father. She told others that I was trying to escape responsibility through technicalities. She said I was hiding behind science instead of stepping up. What unsettled me was not the anger. It was how quickly the narrative hardened. I had not told anyone about my medical history. I had not spoken about it in years. It was not something I volunteered in conversation. It was not something that defined my daily life. But it existed. Years before I met Natalie, I had undergone medical testing after a long-term relationship ended over fertility concerns. The results were not ambiguous. They were documented, confirmed, and repeated. I had been told that conception without medical intervention was not possible. I had accepted that reality quietly. Natalie knew this. Or at least, she had known once. We had discussed it early in our relationship. Not in detail, not dramatically, but clearly enough. At the time, she said she was not sure she wanted children. She said life had many ways of being full. Now, she acted as if that conversation had never happened. As her version of events spread, I felt something unfamiliar settle into place. It was not panic. It was clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was preparation. By the end of the second week, Natalie informed me that she had spoken to a lawyer. She said it casually, during dinner, as if mentioning a dentist appointment. She said it was to protect herself and the baby. I did not respond immediately. I scheduled an appointment with my doctor instead. I retrieved my records. I reviewed dates, test results, and official documentation. Everything matched what I already knew. Nothing had changed. What had changed was the situation around me. I realized then that asking for a paternity test had not escalated the conflict. It had exposed it. Natalie had expected resistance. She had not expected evidence. When I returned home that evening, she was calm again. Too calm. She asked if I had thought about what kind of father I wanted to be. I told her that before any conversations about the future could happen, the truth needed to be established. She did not argue. She smiled. That was when I understood that whatever was coming next had been planned long before that Sunday afternoon, and that the pregnancy announcement had never been the beginning. It had been the opening move. Once the word lawyer entered the conversation, the atmosphere in our house shifted from strained to strategic. Natalie did not pack a bag or threaten to leave. She did not cry or argue anymore. She behaved like someone who had crossed from emotion into process. That change unsettled me more than any accusation could have. The next morning, I noticed the first visible consequence. Natalie had blocked me on every shared social platform we once used casually. At the same time, mutual friends stopped responding to my messages. Not angrily, not dramatically, but with polite silence that carried meaning. I had been placed into a category that people preferred not to touch. At work, the tension followed me. A supervisor pulled me aside under the pretense of checking in. He spoke carefully, saying that personal matters sometimes affected professional focus. He advised me to take a few days off if I needed to get myself together. His words were neutral, but the implication was clear. Someone had spoken. Natalie had not accused me of infidelity or violence. She had chosen something more damaging. She had framed me as unreliable. A man who hesitated when responsibility arrived. A man who asked questions instead of committing. That story spread easily because it required no proof. When I requested the paternity test formally, through an email written carefully and without accusation, Natalie's response arrived within minutes. It was not private. She copied her sister, her mother, and someone I did not recognize. She called the request dehumanizing. She accused me of treating her body like a crime scene. She said I was trying to erase my own child before it existed. By the end of the day, I had received 3 separate messages from people advising me to reconsider my tone and priorities. No one asked why I had made the request. No one asked whether there was a reason beyond fear. The narrative was already complete. Natalie moved quickly. She scheduled a consultation with a family law attorney and informed me that all further communication regarding the pregnancy should be documented. She did not ask for space. She claimed it. I began documenting everything as well. Dates, messages, statements that contradicted earlier ones. I did not do this out of revenge or paranoia. I did it because something in the structure of her actions suggested forethought. She was not reacting. She was executing. Within days, Natalie informed me that she would be moving into the guest room temporarily for emotional safety. She told others that it was because my behavior made her uncomfortable. That phrasing mattered. It positioned her as cautious rather than confrontational. Her family supported her publicly. Her sister posted vague messages about strength and boundaries. Her mother called me once, not to ask questions, but to explain how disappointed she was that I had chosen distrust over love. I listened. I did not defend myself. That silence cost me more than I expected. At a small gathering I attended for a colleague's birthday, someone asked me how Natalie was doing. The question was polite, but the eyes watching me were not neutral. I answered honestly, saying she was preparing for motherhood. The room went quiet. Someone nodded slowly and said it was good that she had support. Not that we had support, that she did. I realized then that my role in the story had already been rewritten as optional. Natalie's lawyer sent a preliminary notice requesting financial disclosures related to marital assets. The timing was early. Too early for custody discussions. Too early for child support calculations. The request did not make sense unless the pregnancy was being used as leverage rather than reality. I consulted my own attorney. He reviewed the correspondence and asked one question that confirmed my growing concern. He asked whether Natalie had ever discussed alternative conception methods with me. I told him no. He advised me to retrieve every medical document I possessed and to stop communicating directly with Natalie until further notice. When I returned home that evening, Natalie was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing paperwork. She did not hide it. She did not act guilty. She asked me whether I had finally accepted that the situation was out of my control. I told her that I wanted clarity, not control. She laughed quietly and told me that clarity came from trust. That was the moment I stopped believing this was about a child. The following week, Natalie escalated publicly. She attended a family gathering without me and spoke openly about how isolating pregnancy could be when your partner refused to stand beside you emotionally. She did not accuse me of abandoning her physically. She accused me of failing her spiritually. That distinction mattered. It made her story harder to challenge without appearing cruel. People began sending me articles about men who struggled with commitment. Friends suggested therapy. One acquaintance told me privately that refusing a child was a decision that haunted men forever. I did not refuse a child. I requested verification. Natalie framed my silence as guilt. At my attorney's recommendation, I scheduled a follow-up appointment with my doctor. The visit was clinical and unemotional. The results were unchanged. The diagnosis remained firm. Natural conception without medical intervention was not feasible. I requested certified copies of my records. That night, I stored them in a folder I did not label. Natalie noticed the folder days later. She did not ask what it contained. She asked whether I was preparing to embarrass her. I told her I was preparing to protect myself. She warned me that exposing private medical information to justify abandonment would not end well. Her confidence remained intact. Soon after, her lawyer submitted a statement characterizing my paternity request as an attempt to destabilize Natalie emotionally during pregnancy. The language was careful, legal, and devastating in implication. It suggested intent without stating accusation. The court of public opinion responded faster than any legal one. I lost 2 consulting opportunities within a week. One client told me they preferred not to be associated with unresolved domestic conflict. Another stopped replying altogether. Natalie never asked whether I was coping. She asked whether I was ready to apologize. I refused. That refusal hardened her strategy. Her attorney scheduled mediation, citing irreconcilable differences and concern for prenatal well-being. The invitation framed the session as a chance for me to demonstrate responsibility. I accepted. At mediation, Natalie presented herself as calm, wounded, and patient. She spoke about expectations and disappointment. She spoke about dreams and emotional absence. She never addressed biology. When the mediator asked whether a paternity test would resolve concerns, Natalie responded that it would only deepen the harm. That answer was rehearsed. My attorney responded by stating that medical documentation existed that made paternity uncertain by definition. Natalie's lawyer did not object. He smiled. That was the first moment I felt true unease. He requested time to review the documentation. He did not express surprise. He did not question validity. He did not push back. He behaved as if he had expected this. After mediation ended, Natalie told me that I had embarrassed myself and wasted everyone's time. She said that facts did not matter when intent was obvious. She said that people already knew who I was. I went home alone. That night, I opened the folder and reviewed every page again, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to remind myself that reality still existed somewhere outside perception. I realized then that Natalie's strategy had never depended on whether the child was mine. It depended on whether I could be made irrelevant before the question was ever answered. And as I prepared to formally submit my medical proof, I understood something else. Natalie was not afraid of what I was about to reveal. She was waiting for it. The day I submitted my medical records was the day the story should have ended. From a logical standpoint, there was nothing left to debate. The documents were not opinions or estimates. They were clinical conclusions drawn from repeated testing, years apart, by different specialists. They established that natural conception was not possible for me. There were no ambiguous phrases, no conditional language. The records did not accuse Natalie of anything. They simply stated a fact that existed long before our marriage. I expected denial. I expected outrage. I expected Natalie to pivot emotionally, to accuse me of manipulation or exaggeration. What I did not expect was silence. Her lawyer acknowledged receipt of the records within hours. The response was brief and professional. There was no challenge to authenticity. There was no request for verification. There was no suggestion that the documents were incomplete. That was the first crack. By the next morning, the shift was visible. Natalie's family stopped contacting me entirely. Friends who had previously sent moral lectures began sending neutral check-ins that avoided the subject altogether. At work, my supervisor scheduled a follow-up meeting and quietly rescinded the suggestion that I take time off. The narrative paused. Natalie, however, did not. She did not apologize. She did not retreat. She changed tone. She began telling people that the pregnancy had been complicated from the start. She framed it as a sensitive medical situation that deserved privacy. She asked for understanding rather than support. She stopped naming me as the obstacle and began referring to circumstances beyond anyone's control. It was subtle, but deliberate. During our next legal meeting, her lawyer requested a continuance. He cited the need to clarify medical context related to conception. Again, there was no shock in his voice. No disbelief. He asked whether I had ever consented to fertility treatment during our marriage. I said no. He nodded and wrote something down. That was the second crack. Natalie did not look at me during that meeting. She stared at the table, hands folded, expression neutral. She did not appear frightened or angry. She appeared focused, as if tracking variables. When we returned home, she asked whether I felt relieved now that my secret was out. I told her it had never been a secret. She said secrets were defined by who believed them. The following week, the court ordered preliminary financial disclosures. This was standard procedure, but Natalie's submissions raised questions almost immediately. There were withdrawals from our joint account that I did not recognize. The amounts were not catastrophic, but they were specific, timed, regular. My attorney flagged them and requested clarification. Natalie's lawyer responded that the funds had been used for medical expenses related to conception. That was the third crack. I requested documentation. What arrived was not what I expected. The invoices were real. The clinic existed. The services were legitimate. The problem was not fabrication. The problem was authorization. The paperwork included consent forms. My name was on them. The signature was not mine. The realization did not come with anger. It came with something colder. Precision. Natalie had not panicked when I asked for a paternity test because she had never intended to rely on natural conception. She had not reacted when I submitted my medical records because she had prepared for that outcome. She had not argued biology because she had built an alternate narrative that did not require it. She had used marital funds to pursue fertility treatment without my knowledge. And she had signed my name. When my attorney confronted her lawyer with the discrepancy, the response was measured. He did not deny the signature issue. He reframed it. He stated that Natalie believed she had implied consent based on prior discussions about family planning. He stated that the clinic had not required in-person verification for both partners. He stated that the intent had been to build a family, not deceive. Then he made his move. He submitted a filing asserting that I had a moral obligation to the child regardless of genetic connection, citing marital partnership, financial contribution, and implied parenthood. He argued that the question of biology was secondary to the reality of intent and expectation. It was a calculated gamble. It reframed the entire conflict. The pregnancy was no longer presented as a result of betrayal. It was presented as a unilateral decision made in pursuit of shared goals. Natalie was no longer the accuser. She was the architect of inevitability. Publicly, the shift worked. Some people returned to Natalie's side. They said things like responsibility transcended DNA. They said fatherhood was about presence, not proof. They said love was more important than paperwork. They did not mention consent. Privately, the reaction was different. The clinic launched an internal review when notified of the forged consent. They requested originals. They requested correspondence. They requested payment authorization records. Natalie's calm began to fracture. She stopped attending social events. She stopped posting vague affirmations. She became cautious, quiet. During our next meeting, she finally spoke directly to me. She asked whether I was satisfied now that I had complicated everything. I told her I had not complicated anything. I had uncovered it. Her lawyer attempted to salvage the position by requesting sealed proceedings, citing privacy concerns. The court agreed temporarily. That decision protected Natalie from immediate public fallout, but it also triggered deeper scrutiny. The judge ordered a full audit of financial transactions related to the fertility treatment. The amounts were not trivial anymore. They were substantial. Funds had been moved between accounts. Transfers had been structured to avoid attention. There were deposits that did not originate from our shared income. My attorney asked one question that shifted the trajectory again. He asked whether a donor had been involved. Natalie's lawyer hesitated before responding. Yes, he said. A donor had been selected through the clinic. I had not consented. I had not been informed. The child was not biologically mine. The room absorbed that fact quietly. Natalie's lawyer then argued that disclosure would have been emotionally destabilizing and counterproductive to marital harmony. That explanation satisfied no one. What followed was not chaos. It was process. The court ordered a suspension of Natalie's access to shared funds. The clinic froze her account. The forged consent triggered mandatory reporting procedures. Natalie was advised to retain separate legal counsel for potential civil exposure. The pregnancy remained real. The illusion surrounding it collapsed. Natalie returned home that evening and packed a bag. She did not argue. She did not threaten. She told me that none of this would have happened if I had trusted her. I did not respond. Trust had never been the missing element. Consent had. As she left, she said something that confirmed everything I had suspected. She said she had needed certainty, not permission. The following day, her lawyer submitted a new motion. He requested emergency recognition of parental responsibility based on marital intent and emotional investment. It was bold, it was aggressive, and it would not survive what was coming next. Because the court had not yet reviewed the full scope of what Natalie had done to make this pregnancy happen. And when they did, the story would stop being about fatherhood entirely. It would become about fraud. The emergency motion Natalie's lawyer filed was aggressive, but it was also desperate. It leaned heavily on language about emotional bonds, marital intent, and stability for the unborn child. It avoided mentioning forged documents, unexplained funds, or the donor arrangement that had already begun to unravel. The filing treated those issues as side notes rather than structural failures. The court did not accept that framing. The judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing, limited in scope but broad in implication. It would not decide custody or support yet. It would determine whether Natalie's actions constituted misrepresentation within the marriage and misuse of shared assets. That distinction mattered more than anyone outside the room seemed to understand. Natalie hired separate counsel 2 days later. That decision alone told me everything. Her original lawyer had built his strategy around preserving a narrative. The second lawyer focused on damage control. He requested delays. He asked for sealed records. He attempted to narrow the questions under review. None of it stopped the process that had already been set in motion. The clinic completed its internal audit first. Their report was clinical, unemotional, and devastating. Consent had been falsified. Payment authorization had been submitted without both parties' approval. The donor agreement referenced a marital partnership that had never been legally confirmed. The clinic referred the matter to its compliance department and flagged it for potential regulatory review. Natalie lost access to the clinic's services immediately. That did not affect the pregnancy itself, but it dismantled the professional infrastructure she had relied on to legitimize her decisions. Next came the financial audit. The unexplained deposits were traced to Natalie's personal account, not our shared income. They originated from a short-term loan taken without my knowledge, secured against assets that did not legally belong to her alone. The withdrawals from our joint account violated the conditions of our marriage agreement, which required mutual consent for medical expenses exceeding a specific threshold. That violation triggered consequences Natalie had not anticipated. The court issued a temporary injunction freezing certain assets pending resolution. Natalie's counsel objected, arguing hardship. The judge responded that hardship did not excuse misrepresentation. Throughout this process, Natalie did not cry or lash out. She sat quietly, occasionally conferring with her lawyer. Her earlier certainty had been replaced by calculation. She was no longer trying to win. She was trying to minimize loss. The most damaging moment came unexpectedly. During testimony, her lawyer attempted to argue that forging my signature had been an administrative mistake rather than intentional deception. The judge asked whether Natalie had ever informed me of the fertility treatment before initiating it. Her lawyer hesitated. The answer was no. The judge asked whether Natalie had ever received explicit consent from me, verbal or written. Again, no. The courtroom absorbed that silence. The judge then asked whether Natalie had understood that conceiving a child through a donor without informing her spouse could carry legal consequences. Her lawyer admitted that Natalie had been aware of the risk. That admission changed the tone of the proceedings. What had been framed as a marital disagreement became a question of intent. The court ruled that I bore no parental responsibility for the child, genetic or otherwise. The ruling was precise. It cited lack of consent, misrepresentation, and financial misconduct. It stated clearly that emotional narratives could not override documented actions. Natalie's emergency motion was denied. Her lawyer attempted to salvage one final argument, asserting that public exposure would irreparably harm Natalie and the child. The judge agreed to maintain sealed records for the time being, but warned that further misconduct would remove that protection. The marriage itself was addressed last. The court granted a dissolution based on irreconcilable differences and material breach of trust. The language was formal, but the meaning was absolute. Natalie's actions had fundamentally altered the legal foundation of the marriage. There was no dramatic reaction, no outburst. Natalie nodded and gathered her papers. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, but they had little to report. The sealed proceedings prevented details from emerging immediately. What did circulate was speculation, confusion, and a quiet shift in public sentiment. People who had once condemned me began reaching out cautiously. Apologies were rare. Explanations were more common. Most people said they had assumed. Some said they had believed the version that sounded simpler. I accepted none of it personally. The professional damage did not vanish overnight. 2 clients never returned. 1 colleague avoided me entirely. Trust, once eroded, did not rebuild automatically. Natalie moved into a small apartment across town. She did not contact me again. Her lawyer handled all remaining communication. The pregnancy continued under medical supervision, funded through means that no longer involved me. The loan she had taken became her responsibility alone. The clinic cooperated fully with regulators. No criminal charges were filed, but civil penalties followed. Natalie settled quietly to avoid further scrutiny. The consequences were not theatrical. They were cumulative. Natalie lost access to shared financial stability. She lost credibility within her professional circle. Her family remained supportive, but their tone changed. Support turned practical rather than celebratory. I rebuilt my life slowly. I did not publish documents or give interviews. I did not seek vindication through exposure. The truth existed in court records, not headlines. What remained with me was something less visible. I learned how easily narratives replaced facts when emotions were involved. I learned how quickly people assigned blame without understanding structure. I learned that asking for proof was not cruelty, but protection. Most of all, I learned that responsibility required consent, not assumption. The child would be born into a world shaped by decisions I had not made. That reality carried weight, but not obligation. The court had been clear, and clarity mattered. Natalie and I did not speak again. The last update I received came through a formal notice informing me that all financial entanglements had been resolved. The language was final. There would be no appeals. The story ended not with revenge or satisfaction, but with documentation. And that was enough.